So it's really nice to kind of be here this evening with you all for this creative practitioners in discussion with Bothy Project, focusing on our non-fiction writing residents from this year. My name is Leslie Young and I'm director of Bothy Project. And I'm going to start just by with some of the kind of housekeeping information, which is just to say that this event is being recorded and it will be made available in our library of talks kind of in the next couple of weeks. If you'd like to use the closed caption function, you should be able to enable it at the bottom of your screen. The speakers have asked that those who are happy to keep their cameras on during the event, so the event has a degree of conviviality by having a sense of the kind of audience kind of present. So if you're happy to keep your camera on, then please do. Questions can be asked either in the chat during the sessions, or in person kind of after at the end of, in the kind of the question and answer session. And also kind of if you keep your mics off, then it will only be the kind of the speakers, the people presenting, that should kind of end up in your kind of speaker view, which might kind of help you kind of focus kind of during the event. But that's all the kind of housekeeping. So I should introduce Bothy Project. I imagine kind of some of you have maybe kind of come across us, but we're an independent arts charity based in Scotland, and we operate in a set of rural contexts in Scotland. We provide creative residencies in our bespoke off-grid buildings, and we have a Bothy on the island of Egg, which we'll hear about tonight. So that's on off Scotland's west coast. And we also have the original kind of Bothy Project, Bothy, which is at Inshriach in the Cairngorms National Park near Aviemore. We started in 2011, and it began as a kind of artist-run project, really definitely with the intention of kind of being for artists spending time kind of in landscape and doing their work within the sort of the productive limited parameters of these are small kind of Bothy buildings, but it was only kind of over a kind of number of years, and kind of it was kind of some opportunistic kind of or taking some kind of opportunities that kind of came to kind of Bothy Project, that it grew kind of into a sort of still a small kind of organisation, but an organisation which is able to organise kind of funded residencies when we're able to generate funds to support creative practitioners to go on residencies, but also kind of we work in partnership with a number of other organisations. So we have grown kind of from that original kind of artist run an artist imagined kind of project that it was kind of at the start. So now we host, we're sort of very well kind of recognised within the visual arts, but there have also been a number of residencies with musicians and others, and we've sort of definitely kind of formalised kind of the strands of residency that we have and the practitioners that we are going to be focusing on kind of in the kind of coming years. So we host creative residencies for practitioners in visual art, craft and design, music, literature and performance, as well as thinkers, researchers and people who live locally to each of our Bothys. So this cohort of writers is a very kind of clear kind of step towards these kind of focusing on these kind of identified disciplines, and also making their kind of their work kind of visible kind of through the context of our public programme. So the aim of our residencies has always generally our residencies last a week, and the aim is for practitioners to connect with their own practice, but also to kind of be based within the kind of landscape, so that the Inshriach Bothy is in a woodland, and the Isle of Egg Bothy is on a croft looking kind of out to sea. And these off-grid buildings are relatively basic. They're possibly not quite as rustic as the kind of as some of the mountain bothies that you might kind of encounter if you were kind of walking or working kind of in the landscape kind of in the past. But they are kind of simple structures where there isn't kind of there's often limited kind of electricity. There's limited space, but inside the buildings, but people tend to discover that there's everything that they need. And there's no kind of, there aren't any production facilities there. So the facilities tend to be there, you know, a table and a chair and a space, and maybe kind of quietness to think. So Sweeney's Bothy is located on the island of Egg, and it was designed by architect Ian MacLeod with artist Bobby Niven, in collaboration with Alec Finlay as part of Creative Scotland's Year of Natural Heritage in 2013. So for this event and for this group of kind of residencies that we're kind of bringing the residents together, 6 writers were selected as part of this series. And the open call, which happened at the start of this year, was open to UK-based writers with between 3 and 6 years of writing experience, who had not yet published a book or a major body of work. And we were very pleased that kind of these residencies, and also a set of 20 in total residencies, were supported by Creative Scotland. So it's been wonderful to be able to support both writers, visual artists, and soon to be composers that will be invited to apply. So the selected residents who are here tonight were Gaar Adams, Anna Baum, Sophie Lau, Lisette Monroe, and Eleanor McCullough. Natasha Rowana was also selected, but she sadly isn't able to join us tonight. So everybody other than Eleanor has made it to Egg, to Sweeney's Bothy. Eleanor was thwarted by weather and trains, but she'll travel, she'll try again kind of in January. So we wish her luck when that kind of, wish her luck and good weather when January comes. And tonight we're also joined by Orkney-based writer Cal Flyn, who was part of the selection panel with Tom Jeffries and Arusa Kershon back in May. So I'll introduce Cal, and then we'll kind of go to the panelists to hear from them. So Cal's latest book, Islands of Abandonment, was Sunday Times bestseller and has been shortlisted for numerous awards, including the Baillie Gifford Prize for non-fiction and the Royal Society of Literature's Onjati Prize. She was the winner of the Sunday Times Charlotte Aitken Young Writer of the Year Award in 2021 and the John Burroughs Medal for Natural History Writing. I have to say, I was really excited when Cal accepted the invitation to join the panel, because I'd read Islands of Abandonment and was very pleased that that you'd been intrigued by the landscape of the Bings in West Lothian, which is where I grew up. If you haven't read kind of Cal's book, I really would kind of recommend it as a way to kind of orientate yourself in kind of the contemporary world with some sanguine hope kind of within it. So Cal, I just wonder if I could kind of ask you at this point to maybe kind of reflect on the time that we spent when we were reading the applications, and there was a fair old kind of stack of applications, and just your kind of general kind of what your interest was. I know that you've been to kind of both of the Bothys, but also that you had a sense of what we were kind of offering, kind of these kind of emerging writers, but then you kind of actually encountered all the applications. So it'd be nice to hear just your kind of quick thoughts on that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. It was quite a job. It was very impressive. I think we had this incredible variety of applications. I didn't know what to expect going in, but I think we all of us as judges had quite a clear vision about what we were looking to reward and recognize. And it was this idea of finding people, emerging writers who were at a point in their career where they were zeroing in on a project. We wanted some kind of clarity of vision, that they're working on something very quite solid, and therefore we're at a moment in their work where having a week in a Bothy like this, in which you sort of sit and sort of confront all the issues with the project and think it through fully without any disturbance, that might be useful, because that can be more and less helpful at varying stages of the project. Go too early and a week on your own with your thoughts can really send you right off. So so as well as that, of course, we were looking for skill in writing. We were looking for a beautiful turn of phrase. Often lyricism came through in these applications, and although of course writing, or rather the judging of writing, is an incredibly subjective way of interacting, I think that we were sure that we came to a consensus on the people that came through and were given the residencies. So I think that certainly says something, that all three of us were extremely pro all of these writers, and I'm so excited to see what they come up with at the end of their projects.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, no, I mean, it was a real privilege even to have read the applications, then also just to kind of hear the discussion between everybody, between you and Tom and Arusa, because yeah, all the applications were kind of discussed, and there are some very good notes kind of to offer back to all the kind of applicants, which I have to confess have not made their way to all the applicants yet, but the feedback is kind of will wing its way in the new year to everybody. So apologies that that's been delayed, but I'm still kind of excited to have the 6 or the 5 of the 6 kind of selected kind of writers kind of here tonight. So we should probably move on to them, because that's the reason for us being here. So I shall introduce first Gaar. So we'll just run through all the writers first, and then we'll hand back to each of them in turn. So we've kind of constructed the running order. So everybody, the running order kind of speakers kind of follows who went first to the island, and there wasn't, at that point there was no kind of, there weren't connections between the kind of different residents. We've since had a kind of, I think, one Zoom kind of with everybody kind of present. So this is really a kind of opportunity also for the 5 of the 6 kind of residents to actually get to know each other's work kind of as well. So our first, the resident who went first to the Bothy on Egg was Gaar Adams, and he's recently completed an emerging writer fellowship at the London Library, and his current writing explores how queerness and migration cohabit on the Arabian Peninsula. Through original research, he's recording how LGBTQ+ migrants navigate and balance belonging, community building, and subversion in the face of daunting legal peril and human rights abuses. Gaar is based in London, and he's already got the tinsel out in his house. So Gaar, do you want to say a few things, just a couple of things, just to kind of so we hear your voice.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you all for joining. Welcome, everybody. Yeah, I'm going to talk a little more about this later, but my time on egg came really at exactly the right time. And what Cal said is absolutely spot on, which is, had this moment come, a bit earlier or a bit later, it really wouldn't have been the opportune time. And I'm really, really grateful. So looking forward to sharing a bit of work with you all in a bit.
Thanks so much, Gaar. Next, Anna Baum. Hi, Anna. So Anna Baum's writing practice was developed in parallel with her interest and work in ecology and conservation. And she, while she was there, she planned to work on kind of personal essays which explore how autistic people who unmask are enacting a form of rewilding. And Anna's based in Sheffield. Are you in Sheffield tonight, Anna?
Yes, I'm in Sheffield now. Yeah, so I'm an ecology student and a writer, and kind of at the University of Sheffield. And yeah, my time on egg was really special, and it kind of took me in some unexpected directions with my writing, which was quite exciting. And yeah, it was just a lovely time, and I'm incredibly grateful to be here.
Well, thank you for saying that, and thank you for what you're about to share. It'll be, I know, kind of very important to kind of hear. So Lisette May Monroe. Hi, Liz. So Liz is an artist and writer based in Glasgow. She's co-director of Rosie's Disobedient Press with Adrian Howard, a press working with artists who use writing as an essential part of their visual arts practice. And for the residency, Lisette developed ideas around, well, for her proposal is maybe more kind of accurate. She proposed to work around the idea of a suburban horror sited in her hometown of Kippax in Yorkshire. And you were working with kind of memoirs and bringing together ideas of labour, capacity and finance. Liz, how was your time on egg? Oh, I think you're on mute.
That better? That's better. Yeah, it was great. It was my first ever residency. I've never done one before. So for me, it was like this first chance to have a disconnect, but also I guess like a reconnect with a new place and my work. And it was kind of like, I don't know, it felt like washing my brain or something in a nice way. Like it felt like starting afresh with the practice or something. And egg's such a charged and interesting space that it just felt like, yeah, as soon as you step onto egg, you feel like you're stepping into like another part of your practice or the way your brain thinks or something. It's great.
Good. Okay, that's great to hear. Sophie, hi there. So Sophie Lau has a multidisciplinary practice with a focus on work that centres on the Chinese diaspora, as well as other communities from the global majority. Sophie's based in Norwich, and your proposal kind of was around a kind of non-fiction book about Hong Kong, where you were looking at personal anecdotes from your kind of extended family. Can you tell us just in a couple of lines kind of something of how you spent your week?
Yeah, it completely changed my life. I've now basically renounced the internet, apart from for work, otherwise I would not be here. But yeah, I think what I share will make a lot of sense for sort of the direction I've taken, but it definitely came at a very good point for me in like my personal and sort of work life as well. So it's very, very special to me, the time that I had there.
Well, I look forward to hearing what you read. Okay, thanks so much, Sophie. And last tonight is Eleanor McCullough. Eleanor, is on my screen there. She is. Hi, Eleanor. And sadly, you kind of had, well, or maybe it's yet to come. The pleasure of kind of Sweeney's Bothy is yet to come, kind of for you. But you're based in Edinburgh, and you're an artist, writer, and archive assistant who your work is kind of considering the kind of the residues of other people's stories, and your proposal was focusing on women whose role it has been to maintain the legacy of another individual who's possibly considered more kind of central kind of in sort of in conventional kind of history or kind of understanding. So you were developing writing around a set of artists' archives using feminist practice. And I know that you kind of obviously haven't undertaken the kind of residency yet, but you are going to kind of read something around the kind of the topic that you've kind of been working on.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, haven't made it yet, but really looking forward to hopefully getting there in January. And yeah, I've actually got kind of two brief extracts that I'll be reading from. One kind of looking back on where the project kind of started, and then another one kind of looking forward to where it will be taken, hopefully when I'm on Egg. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks, Eleanor. Okay, so sadly, as I said, Natasha Wana kind of won't be able to kind of join us tonight. But at this point, it feels like we can step back to Gaar and give him the floor for around 10 minutes.
Good.
That
Thanks
sounds
very
okay,
much.
Gaar? We'll hand over to you.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. On Egg, and really for quite some time, I've been working on a narrative nonfiction book about queerness, migration, and belonging. The narrative of the book is memoir, so the story of me moving to the Arabian Gulf in 2010, working as a freelance journalist, and developing a secret queer relationship in a place where that's illegal. But the crux of the book is reportage. It's unpacking the research and archive I began to amass throughout the region, which was around a clandestine reporting project I was undertaking, in which I was interviewing queer migrants throughout the Gulf and asking the question, why are you here? Of course, uncovering the answer, or kind of more precisely, the many answers of what draws queer people to live and work in places where they risk imprisonment, deportation, torture, and death, took me on a much longer and potentially more fraught journey, sort of really of dislocation across the Arabian Peninsula. It was a journey in which I had to, not only interrogate the roots of preconceptions held about the region, but also reckon with our very ideas we hold about gender, about sexuality, migration, as well as really how we define home itself. So that's what I was working on. I found out that I was selected for the creative practitioner's residency at quite a crucial time. I'd been writing the book for a few years, doing research and interviewing for nearly a decade, but here I was suddenly amid this sort of personal upheaval of finishing my doctorate at nearly the same time my manuscript was due to my publisher. As soon as I got the email from Bothy Project, I was incredibly grateful, but I also had a slight worry, which was, what would it be like to leave the internet, especially while working on a manuscript that required research, and research meant needing access to what I thought was this vast thing, the internet, and my own transcripts and pile of books that I certainly couldn't bring with me. I can talk more about this later, but on Egg, what I managed to do was really remind myself that all the research on the last two pesky chapters, which was where I was at this moment, was done. So I needed, in fact, to get away from the internet and just write and be present with the stories in a way that the kind of hyper connectivity of the internet was actually getting in the way of at this really critical moment in the life cycle of the manuscript. So I managed to, while on Egg, both finish the manuscript and then during the latter half of the week, go through a sort of physical copy that I had brought and do the kind of fussy line by line work of drafting around flow and style. So that's what I'm going to be sharing today, the latter bit, the work that I was doing, going with kind of a more fine-tooth comb. I'll be reading from the introduction, which I will begin now. Before dusk could settle over the vacant lot, I climbed a pile of cinder blocks to watch two taxi drivers wrestle bare-chested in the sand. The shorter one, standing a full head beneath the furrowed brow of his challenger, punched his thighs in pre-match theatrics while plumes of dust sprouted from the makeshift ring like ill omens portending his swift defeat. But when the fighters locked arms to grapple, the scrawny man pulled loose, swinging a heel into the crook of his larger opponent's knees, pitching him to the ground. As beads of sweat coursed down their torsos, the smaller wrestler grabbed the fallen man's loincloth, using it for traction to climb atop his hulking frame, triumphant. In under a minute, the bout had finished. But this unexpected underdog victory felt like an aftershock to the initial surprise of the event itself. Two South Asian cabbies, nearly naked, sparring in a barren sandlot along the edge of Dubai. In a place where simply donning shorts can run afoul of the city's notoriously strict penal codes, I felt like I was witnessing not just a feat of athletics, but a challenge to an entire socio-political order. Although it would take much longer to understand that the subversion I experienced that evening was also personal. I was not the only spectator that day. The victor bounded out of the ring, and a stout, bearded man pulled him into a firm embrace, wiping away the sand that caked his brow. Clutching each other's shoulders, the men grazed foreheads and grinned through a muted exchange before a throng of fans encircled them, hoisting the wrestler upon their shoulders. In the far corner of the ring, the next pair of wrestlers stripped out of their shalwar kameez, rubbing their biceps for warmth as they waited for the rabble to subside. Only a small tract of reclaimed land separated the sandlot from the open water, and fresh January winds blew in steadily off the Gulf. I jotted a quick line in my notebook about making sure to mention this winter chill. It was one of those I often heard people back home in the Midwest invariably get wrong, spouting some variation of, "Oh, but isn't it always hot over there in the desert?" When I moved to the UAE in 2010, I tried to dismiss questions like this as innocuous, but I was just beginning to realize the outsized role they played in how I was taught to understand the region. I drove 150 kilometers from my home in Abu Dhabi to a sandlot earlier that afternoon for the same reason I often hopped into a car back then, to research an article. It was 2014, my 5th year living on the Arabian Peninsula, and I was filing arts and culture pieces for a variety of American magazines and international media outlets. The personal maelstrom of packing up my life and shipping it to the Middle East for the first time coincided almost to the hour with a larger seismic shift. President Barack Obama's January 20, 2009 inaugural address, in which he took the remarkable step of singling out the Muslim world by name, calling for, quote, "a new way forward based on mutual interest and mutual respect." Living in the Middle East in the early days of a new American presidential administration, the mood felt almost buoyant, as though the region emerged from the Bush foreign policy era as one might from an extended hurricane, unfurling from a defensive crouch to open up the shutters, survey the damage, and let in the light. But over the ensuing half-decade, I watched as American rhetoric on the region failed to match the ideals that Obama's speech entreated. That same year, I began research for the wrestling article. Newsweek, at the time one of the most storied magazines in US publishing, ran a cover photo on the Arab Spring that featured two bearded men, fists clenched, with the headline "Muslim Rage" in bold capital letters. Eschewing any nuance as to how long-standing political grievances were morphing into a complex web of organized protests, the cover seemed to encapsulate the dual lenses that the American media offered to view most of the Muslim world, through violence and through danger. I first pitched my editor this article about Pelwani, a traditional form of South Asian wrestling, in the spirit of offering a critical response to this worldview. In addition to the heterogeneity of the sport's origins, the 16th century Mughals who conquered northern India melded their Sufi-influenced Persian Kushti Pehlavani wrestling with the region's Hindu-inflected Malayuda form. Pelwani wrestling also enjoyed popularity across a wide swath of culturally varied Indian states, Pakistani provinces, and Bangladeshi districts. I imagine penning an article illuminating how Dubai, this diverse capital of an Islamic country, uniquely brought together die-hard wrestling fans, regardless of passport color, socioeconomic status, or religion. My hope was that if I could illustrate this reality to even a few readers, I just might be able to provide a counterbalance to the onslaught of inflammatory headlines and cover stories around me. In the face of so many misconceptions, my initial impulse was to fortify this Pelwani article with a glut of historical research. So I dove in, treading through minutiae, including the physical mechanics of single leg takedowns and the linguistic particularities of Urdu wrestling vocabulary. But when it finally came time to sit and write the article, instead of striking the keys on my laptop, I found myself continually hitting play on my audio recorder. Again and again, I would return to the interviews I had conducted, poring over hours of conversations with wrestlers and spectators, both banal and consequential, on topics ranging from laundry to love, jobs to heartbreak, lifelong dreams attained and those yet unfulfilled. It was a troubling pattern I noticed intensifying with each new story I pitched. This inability to begin writing, coupled with a looming sense that the glut of completely unrelated material stored on my recording device was somehow more salient to my articles than any of my research. And so it was that in those days I would sit and stare at a blinking cursor for hours, caught between a deadline, a word count, and a nagging dread that I could not at all capture the reality of such a misunderstood place without starting the story somewhere else entirely. A beginning rooted not in historical narrative, but buried somewhere in the depths of my recorder. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gaar. That was a kind of wonderful kind of insight into how you kind of began the kind of process of what you were working on. Thank you. If it's not too ingracious, we'll push on so that we can kind of have enough time kind of at the end for there to be dynamic kind of conversation kind of between kind of everyone. So the next kind of speaker is Anna Baum. Anna, would you like to introduce what the piece that you've kind of made, which Evie will then kind of play?
Yeah, absolutely. So my project is a kind of a series of nature-based personal essays. So I started working on this when I was diagnosed as autistic about a year ago. Having undiagnosed autism and quite severe social phobia for a long time without like any understanding of what I was experiencing was quite alienating. And so like now that I understand it a little better, it's given me this real compulsion to kind of write as honestly as I can about it. So in my work, I'm trying to explore things like the grief of not belonging, of loneliness. And if I had to pick a genre for what I'm doing, I probably would say it fits best as nature writing, as kind of the natural world has always been where I've found community and where I've just found it easiest to be a person, really. And I'm kind of interested in exploring this like through an ecological lens. And what I kind of mean by that is what I would consider like the pain that the earth is experiencing is something that we too share. And something that I feel I know intimately through kind of having always felt this like pressure to burn myself out, to like constrict my movements, to push myself beyond my limits, like as a just way of masking. So I've been kind of writing a lot about rewilding of like rivers, of water bodies, of forests, and kind of drawing parallels between the process that I've been going through of learning to unmask and just finding like a deeper sense of ease within myself. So it's kind of still a bit jumbled, but I've kind of been trying to like, that's what I've been trying to find different ways in to talk about. And yeah, I had like imagined that I would use my time on Egg to kind of revisit some older stuff, but I actually found the experience of that in itself like really quite profound and emotional. Because like the first thing I wrote down when I got there was I spend a lot of my time thinking about escaping, and this is just the kind of place that I would escape to. So it felt like a very long way away from the parts of life that I struggle with, and very close to the parts that make me feel like I do belong somewhere. With like so many birds there, the sea so close, the quietness and the solitude. So I just kind of ended up mostly writing about that, just describing being there and just kind of talking about what was coming up for me. And since I've kind of got back, I've been revisiting that and building it into its own essay. So I've kind of shared a little bit of that, and Evie has very kindly helped me kind of like put it together with some videos and stuff like that. So I think, were you gonna share that? That's okay.
A storm rolled in as I slept, sheets of rain and wind that battered the bothy, playing it like an instrument. By morning the air is still and heavy. Rain passes on and rum emerges from the mist. The sky takes on a pearlescent sheen, like a shell that transforms when dipped in water, all its colour and shine revealed. The weather has made me restless, so I packed my bag with a raincoat, notebook and flask of tea, and set out for the shop and cafe by the pier. The walk takes about an hour, tracing the single-track road that runs from one end of the island to the other. Bracken tumbles out of the verges, and there are glimmers of gold on the wet leaves as they are caught by the faint sun. I don't see a single other person on the walkover. Instead, there are swallows, the distant croak of a raven, and far out to sea the tumbling white specks of diving gannets. This is the safest company. I soften, let go of any facial expression, and relax into the warm hug of the morning. When I reach the shop, there is a crowd of people gathered outside. I hesitate, then slip through and find what I came for, and pick up 2 postcards as I wait by the till. I'd planned to go to the cafe, but being around people who all seem to know each other and stand in confident circles, only makes me want to be alone again. I leave as quickly as I can, back up the road, and disappear around the bend. I take the longer way home, around the southern bays of the island towards Kildonan. The noise of people soon disappears, and I feel safe again, but something lingers, the spell broken. The path hugs the shoreline, and my feet drift over to the rock pools, darting, slipping, crouching, and watching always for flickers of movement in the water. Fronds of seaweed are held aloft and sway in the current like dancers to a beat. Shells everywhere, beckoning me to bend and touch, turn and run them over my fingertips. Periwinkles, cockles, whelks, and a blue-rayed limpet, so thin it is translucent, with lines of bright iridescent turquoise. I am sucked in, travelling far and deep as I make small circles. I reach a stretch of the shoreline that swoops back and reveals a smudge of sand. Cracks in the sky draw the colour back into the dark sea, turning it green and glittering. Before I can change my mind, I am stripping down and wading in, up to my knees, wincing as waves lap at my belly, lowering in my hands and swooshing them about to get them used to the cold, then up to my chest, and with a grimace, deep breaths, I am floating. The water is clear as glass. I can see the wrinkles of sand below, littered with broken shells. I swim in circles, too nervous, as always, to go out far. My thoughts are sore, triggered by all those people. It was a reminder of the world outside. Soon I will be caught and reeled back to places that unsettle my body, where I will need to join in with conversations and crowds like those outside the shop, and I still don't know how. I wish I could be as untethered as a gannet that can swiftly fold up its wings and disappear. I wish that this clear water was where I belonged. I know I cannot hide away forever, and I will have to re-emerge. But for now, for today, no one can see me. I am perfectly alone. My face once again lets go of all its forced expression, and the water lilts me like seaweed, my spindly fronds unfurled and caressed.
Thank you, Anna. I can see people clapping. Thank you for sharing that. That was really wonderful of you. Thank you. And yes, and thanks to Evie for pulling it together with the images. So again, ungraciously, I'm going to kind of carry on and ask Liz to share the work that you want to kind of tell people about.
Yeah, well, first of all, Anna, that took me sort of straight back, and I feel like I'm already like in that headspace now to share this work. So thank you so much for that, and thank you, Gaar, as well. So yeah, I actually came to writing through a visual arts practice, and I have sort of no training in writing, and I use it as a way to kind of I see it as part of like my holistic practice and as a way to research the things I like to think about. And as I said, I've never been in a residency before, and I work a lot of jobs, and I applied because I really wanted to be in a space where I felt like none of that real life would get to me. And I wanted there to be like a very physical, geographical gap as well. I wanted there to be the water in between me and my normal situations. And when I went, I did work on some new work, which is, I guess, looking at, as Leslie said, the place where I'm from and how to do that autobiographically. And I feel like when you have your first residency, you're like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And then once you get there, you're like, oh, I'm by myself and I need to learn how to make a fire and do all this stuff. And actually, like doing your day-to-day living and the thing that I guess would exist in your autobiography down the line is a thing that consumes a lot of your thoughts. But there's a lot of things swirling around. And I'd actually applied with a piece that wasn't finished. And I tightened it up when I was there, and I really see it as the starting point of thinking about, I guess, like suburban horror or working class horror. So I'm going to read that for you now. But before I do that, I just want to say I might need to leave at about 7:30. So if you're in discussion and I disappear, just to say thanks to everyone for listening and everything. But yeah, so this is a piece called Heritage Brands. There is a bit of swearing in it, so sorry for that in advance also. My mother lives near a military testing site where they have never done black ops. Recently, I got a call as there'd been a crack in the sky above the nameless village where she lives, the village where black ops have never been conducted. Her familiar voice on the line, jangly like a string bean. This is it, she said. It's happening now. One Christmas, she got me a rape alarm, a set of universally sexy knickers, a knife, used, which she had hid inside of a cushion, and a space in the council's secret nuclear bunker. She had acquired the space for me as she had put herself forward to volunteer there in the event of a nuclear attack. At the time, she worked for the local government, and before the holidays, an email had been circulated to ask the staff to enlist themselves for positions in the bunker. She had applied for the role of showering people off when they came in. Through the architecture of her own logic, she thought this would be the way to keep the cleanest and therefore the safest. For doing this job, hours unknown, you also got spaces in the bunker for your family, available spaces unknown. The secret bunker is absolutely not underneath the town hall. It wasn't much of a visual present, but you could sense the gesture reaching from the depths of her, lurching its way out of her lagoon. Water cleanses all sins, even chemical warfare. A mother, my mother, bathing her children, an endless train of children, arriving at the bunker in muddled stages of bedragglement, a gang of friends getting home after a big night out, knives and rape alarms in pockets, a city of my new siblings all being blasted with a power hose. Last night, a friend told me one year her mum themed all the family's Christmas gifts around power cuts. I hear her again, the voice jingle jangle. It's happening now, she said. Since last Christmas, I've wanted to write about the UK high street store Next. Talk of this store often dominates our family's festive conversations. Next is an aspirational multi-level composite. It is a bog, a suburban hetero wetland. Each Boxing Day, customers, 90% of which are middle-aged white women, queue through the night to acquire a past season candle set or a pair of suede boots with 50% off. This is not out of need or poverty, but because smashing together the want for these things with the option to be seen winning at foraging a bargain is a particular kind of kink for them. Next is the matriarch in the family. The cursive of live, laugh, love proliferates, can never say that, proliferates as giant hogweed, scorching the hands that try to pull it from its roots. Blisters ripe and ripe as a sales sap is heaved through the till. Now, in March 2020, queues feel quite different. I wonder about these wholesome overnight kinkers and if they can ever be reunited with their lust, or if now queuing will always be tarnished with an icky virus. Sickening the candle set, tipping these things over into the forever unwell. It's hard for them to brag now. Oh, it's from Next. The words used to trail behind her like a regal cape. Now they drop like boulders, landing in a pit of nowhere. My mother, the patron saint of the Next sale, will commit a pilgrimage to this holy place every 26th of December. consulting local oracles for the best time to arrive. She will ritually ascend with at least one formal dress for cruises unbooked. In the past month, she has phoned me 3 times to warn me not to touch giant hogweed, a familial exercise in protective consumerism. 11 days after Christmas is my birthday. One year, my 7th, we drove to meet my dad from work, parking outside the factory, convulsing with noise. Our red Vauxhall becoming the breakwater between the local domestic and a global violence. My mum focused in the driving seat, waiting to do the handover, to pass me over like a drug deal, in a Marks and Spencer's shirt and next black trousers, her best battle armour. Both of these things passed down from it to me 10 years later. My first day of work at the local government, heritage brands, textiles with the fuck you aspect of formal. She sat, hands tight to the wheel, staring through the abyss of the 2-mile-long factory, a completely volatile landscape. The struts and beams of steel venting out loose ammunition as meter by meter warts burst, showering XX weld under the shutters. She was still watching the fiery dandruff disperse across the forecourt while the grumble of an engine, much bigger than the one we were in, began to bear on us from behind. Fumbling up slowly, the shadow of the war vehicle consumed us, an ingot cloud rolling over, its density cast over the car as the light was rapidly consumed. The essence of the Vauxhall so flattened it could be slotted neatly into an eclipse. Fear in a car park is usually silent, cold, mute, unsound. We sat suspended in its sightline, unheard and gagging. They kept us there in view and in the shadow for a maze of time. After it worked through its own logic and it made its own decisions, the tank cleared us, releasing us from its murk. Tracks spinning perfect soft ovals, the armament now firmly forward, confidently leading the way. From the side, my dad appeared, 10 minutes late, or perhaps perfectly on time. No hello on the approach. "Why'd you let them do that?" she said, her voice clanging like a church bell, the first time they'd spoken in 10 months. "They know we are in here." "Target practice," he said. He opened my door and I got out, stood on the tarmac holding hands with a giant hogweed while she drove away. "It's happening now," she said from the back of her head, hands jangling on the steering wheel, her voice rattling out of the exhaust, her cape trapped in the door dragging through the dirt.
Thank you, Liz. That was a great kind of set of visual kind of images to kind of connect things that some I'm familiar with and some I'm not. So thank you for that. Sophie, it's now over to you.
Yes, I might just launch in with the reading. I feel like that's gonna. I've learned to write a lot more honestly, probably post Bothy. And actually, I recently wrote an 11-page letter to someone that's no longer in my life. There's a lot of stuff from that I probably want to incorporate into this manuscript. But yeah, so this is how it starts off. On intentions. What was it like growing up in Hong Kong? Me. Not too long ago, I was working on Baudelaire's Fin de Paris with one of my students. In the foreword, Baudelaire states, and I'm loosely translating from memory here, that the greatest honour for a poet is being able to accomplish exactly what they set out to do. While making a start on this manuscript, I was sat at the desk of Sweeney's Bothy on the Isle of Egg, on my second writing residential of the year. In my first residential, graciously bestowed upon me by Metal New Artist Network, the Peterborough location, I set out to write a poetry collection based on Chinese mythology. It was to form the basis of a pamphlet I hoped to submit to independent presses this year, one that explored my identity as a queer British Chinese person, whilst remaining firmly rooted in tradition and heritage. I ended up writing a singular sad love poem based on a focaccia recipe. For my second residential, graciously bestowed upon me by Bothy Project, I set out to write a non-fiction book about Hong Kong, based on interviews with family members. I instead read 6 books from the small yet beautifully curated library, went on 2 walks to 2 very different yet similarly beautiful beaches, tried to draw the outline of rum in the sand on one and tried to make the sands sing on the other, failing miserably on both accounts. Signed up for a willow weaving taster course and subsequently did said willow weaving taster course, making a fish and a small serving platter. Watched wild bunnies bound up and down the track leading to the Bothy door, inadvertently realising that the white I imagined to be cotton wool-esque fluff on their bottoms was actually the colour of the entire underside of their tails. I chopped copious amounts of wood for fire kindling, only to realise that you can, in fact, fit the original size logs into the stove without any difficulty, and they will burn just fine even if the fire is not fully raging. I cut my finger on a rusty barbed wire fence while climbing over a stile and promptly worried that I would get one of the hepatitises or tetanus, not knowing which as I didn't have any internet access. Found myself scared witless by a part of the cliff that, in the dark, out of the Bothy window, looked frighteningly like a person, and wrote some incoherent ramblings of my mind, which, so far, still have ostensibly nothing to do with Hong Kong. When I first conceptualised this book, I wanted to divide the interview transcripts into separate anecdotes and write each one out, giving clearly framed, if rather forced, aperçus of Hong Kong. Mulling it over further, I realised that doing so would mean I'd be superimposing my voice on top of every story I chose to spotlight, which seemed to defeat the very purpose of highlighting Hong Kong authentically, as it used to be. I then wanted to keep the interview transcript untouched, simply splitting it up into sections where appropriate, adding my own reflections at the end of each section. That seemed to be the only option to keep both my interviewees' voices and my own intact. What I've ended up with is neither. Safe to say, by Baudelaire's standards, I am certainly not, and perhaps never will be, a poet or writer of the greatest honour. What a shame. So, what have we ended up with? An ode to my love of epigraphs, perhaps. During my stay at Totley Barton in the summer, I was doing an Avon writing retreat as part of the 2022 writing room cohort. I asked one of the Apples and Snakes staff how writers come up with good epigraphs. Do they keep a running list of all the quotes they've ever found interesting and pull out the most suitable one or ones for the project? Are some quotes so impactful that, even without being recorded, they're able to be recalled at the drop of a hat? I never got a straight answer, but the likelihood is it's a different process for every writer. Maybe this entire book is simply an offshoot of my epigraph process. After all, for better or for worse, I can't think of many people whose words have had a larger impact on me than my family. So there we are. This isn't the book I intended to write, but it's the book that happened to be written. A collection of personal epigraphs and even more personal reflections. And I hope you, dear reader, find something valuable in here. And I hope one day I'll actually manage to write my book about Hong Kong. But maybe hidden amongst these very pages is that very book. So then one of the epigraphs and sort of section following it is this. So, on happiness. If you do that, you might be happy. You'll be able to say, I was happy once, but in the end, you'll have tried everything but have held on to nothing, my dad. I think I'd rather take the chance on potential happiness than live life trying my hardest to hold on to things. I'm a reformed hoarder now, don't you know? I even did a massive clear out of my wardrobe a few months ago that resulted in 4 bulging bin bags of clothing and 2 enormous tote bags of cliché romance novels being donated to cancer research. Let's ignore all the unnecessary things I held on to though, one of which was the official Twilight fragrance, Freesia and Strawberry, if you know, you know, which my cousin in Japan specially ordered for me over a decade ago that I've still yet to open. It takes pride of place on the top shelf of my wardrobe, one step at a time. I don't think that's what my dad meant when he spoke of holding on to things though. Let's consider that something lost in translation. A lot of things are between us. Something in his statement makes me think happiness to him is the least important thing in life, or at least it's secondary compared to financial gain and job security. I think when he insists on the importance of holding on to things, it's more about loss than gain. He's saying to me, don't lose what you've worked so hard for. I guess that's a mantra that foghorns through the minds of most immigrants. It blares out even my most logical rebuttals of, I have enough, Dad, I'll be okay, I'll always be okay. I think my dad leads a very contradictory existence, although he would never admit it. He teaches me the importance of letting go, but also insists upon the need to hold on to everything once it's in your grasp. Recently, I've learned to accept that not everyone, not everything is meant to stay. In fact, at our most unsentimental, we know that everything is fleeting. All that is certain is that we're all hurtling towards death at varying rates. If nothing is permanent, it then becomes a question of how long each thing or each person can be present before they have to leave. If I'm to learn to let go, and I must in this life if I'm to not collapse into a ball crying at the inevitability of death and decay, it tracks that I must learn also not to hold on. We all have different goals in life. That's what makes the world go round. I think my only real goal, if I dig deep into the very marrow of my being, is to be able to look back at the end of it all and say, I was happy. It matters less the framework of this statement, just that it rings true. After all, how can you quantify happiness? How can you plot the longitude or latitude of joy? Yeah, that's what I've got so far.
Thank you, Sophie. Thank you. The next presenter is Eleanor. Are you happy to take over, Eleanor?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I guess I'm in a kind of different place to everyone else, in that I'm still in a kind of state of anticipation rather than reflection about the upcoming residency and trip to Egg. So for that reason, I'm just going to speak briefly about the project that I will be working on. And then I'll read 2 short excerpts that I hope will show where this project came from and then where it will be going as well. And just first, for a bit of context, my practice is a visual arts practice, and writing plays a really key part of that. And for a few years now, it's been focused on the kinds of shadow work that take place behind the scenes in artist studios and foundations and estates and collections. And I'm particularly focused on the figures that make and shape a legacy. And I've found that these legacy makers are often women, the wives or partners of artists. And while their kind of unwavering belief and this kind of tireless work is the reason that why many artists' work still exists today, their voices are surprisingly hard to hear within kind of dominant cultural narratives. So how can we listen for them, and how can we let their stories spill out? Because I found that they can tell us so much, not just about labour and love, but also about dependency, dedication, debt, and issues surrounding legacy and value. So I'll just jump into the first excerpt now, which is a section of scripted dialogue that I've been working on between a group of 6 of these significant others. And for the sake of this reading, as I don't have 6 performers with me, I've chosen one voice as a kind of monologue, the voice of Maggie, who's explaining her decision to leave a relationship, having seen a future that she didn't want to be part of. It got to the point where it just started to take over everything else. I was cooking and cleaning the house, hosting, listening, always listening. But I was also making an inventory of all the work he was making, and he was really churning it out. I mean, really. So this meant cataloguing, making the database. Then there was the packing and doing all the emails, all that really time-consuming stuff. I enjoyed it all at first. I felt like I was part of something and that he was truly appreciative. But it's not that I owed this to him. I don't know. I took pride in being the facilitator, well, in him needing me. But maybe I'm just a woman who loves too much. You know something? He just published a book recently and doesn't mention me a single time. But if you open my diary or any of my writing, his name will be there. Guaranteed it will be. I just don't feature in his understanding of himself or his work. But to me, it's all related. How can it not be? And when we had our last conversation, before I told him to just go, I was trying to explain that if he truly loved me, he would have love for me, as in for my autonomy, not love for my service to him as X, Y, or Z. And I don't think he heard me. I don't think that he could hear me. And I couldn't hear him either. We were split. Everything was just difference. It felt like I was losing a chunk of myself, and I'll never make myself so available as a helpmate. I remember visiting some friends of his once. He was an artist, of course, and she had been his assistant, and I guess his muse too, but I don't really know what the word muse really means. It's always seemed like a cipher to me, a muse. It's a two-dimensional thing, like a projection. But I remember being so horrified by this woman's duty, her dedication. She was just sitting there so quietly, just sat beside him, repeating the end of his sentences. She was a shadow, and I just saw myself in 30 years' time. And no one talks about these doubts. It's just not been part of the conversation. No one talks about why we do it either. It's always the practicalities, the how, not the why, don't you think? At first, sure, it just felt like we were close to each other, that we were almost coinciding. And I couldn't even say at what point this changed, almost like a scale was tipped off balance. Or maybe I just realized, well, that maybe we weren't as symbiotic as I thought. But then parasitism is a symbiotic relationship after all, and we all parasite off each other. But it always goes in one direction. Have you noticed that? The roles are always the same, the host and the parasite. So just as a way of moving into the next excerpt, I'll just explain a little about the process of the one you just heard. This dialogue began, as much of my work often does, with other people's words and a highlighter. And it's fluorescence kind of lifting words or phrases from interviews and testimonies from particular women and accounts of their work. And the more material that I digested, the more patterns began to emerge, not just in the type of work involved, but also in the really human details. So the recurring admissions of guilt and doubt and frustration, and also this immense strength and stubbornness that really shatter this preconception of these women being somehow meek or just kind of blindly supportive. And I really wanted to amplify the plurality of these figures and the systemic nature of their work. So I've been weaving multiple voices together from source text to form these kind of composite characters or stand-ins. So for this excerpt, I was looking at the recordings made by the Italian feminist Carla Lonzi that she made during the breakdown of her marriage to a painter, and also an essay written by Magda Salveson, who I've been working for about 4 years, in which she describes an early rupture in her relationship with the painter John Schuler as she started to become aware of his dependency on her. And I really wanted to see what might happen if these figures, who largely work in private, kind of often domestic spaces and across different periods of time, if they got together, what would they discuss and what could we learn from their dialogue about their experiences? And I'm still coming across new voices that I want to add to this conversation. So this brings me to what I'll be doing on Egg. I'll be hoping to listen to a new voice, that of Rowan James, who began as Wilhelmina Barnes-Graham's assistant in the 1970s in St Ives, and then moved to Wilhelmina's house in Scotland to become her assistant there, and then soon became her kind of life partner as well. And I've been given amazing access to Rowan's letters and diaries and photographs at the Wilhelmina Barnes-Graham Trust in Edinburgh. And as an introduction to this new research, I've typed up just some of the notes that I've been making sitting in the archive as I kind of leaf through letters and notes and listen to recordings that Willie and Rowan made together in conversation. So here's one of my early encounters with Rowan. Tipex taped corrections and double underlinings. A running commentary with corrections paperclipped to articles and sent back to the authors in haste. Trying to make sense of stacks of index cards from the 1930s to the 1970s, upgraded to large format folios, also by hand. These are Rowan's inventions. Album B, square format photographs, chopping wood at Balmungo and burning it together in their blue overalls. Rowan wears a white button-down shirt and neckerchief. She hangs herself around her body, her work of selection and expression of her intent, making visible things private and concealed. They saw a log together, both reaching down. Willie helping Rowan who holds the chainsaw. Blue smoke from the bonfire rises, just getting going. Chapped lips, cold winter day, low raked light. They smile together at work. Neither of us have thought of ourselves, and there will come a day we will be glad. Otherwise, we might have felt we'd done the wrong thing. Once you're settled in Balmongo after the first loneliness, be happy and at peace in that phase. With teamwork, we will overcome the hurdles. Balmongo was an awkward legacy. Scotland was a whole second life for Jasmine to become Rowan. It's annoying how much I've relied on you, longing to work in every department, but have to take it day by day. I decided to dig. I am turning the ground as a plough would. Every day is a joy, regardless of the job. As if there is a hidden pattern. For once, I don't feel like I'm pushing the tide, but ebbing with it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. Thank you. So at this point, the residents and Cal, I sort of imagine there's probably some questions to kind of flow initially from Cal, but then maybe kind of involving the other residents. And then in due course, we'll kind of open up to questions from the wider audience. So if you want to pop them in the chat, that's fine, but equally, but equally at the kind of the appropriate juncture, it would be just great to hear kind of some of your voices if you feel like speaking on Zoom. So either way, audience members want to kind of join in, that'll happen in about, I don't know, 15 minutes. But Cal, it would be, now that you've kind of heard some of the material that's been kind of produced kind of either through the residencies or in some way kind of been given a, I don't know, a kind of a push or a kind of a thrust in a different direction. Because it does feel that the kind of residencies don't necessarily produce a straightforward like mode of production. It's a kind of, it's a, you know, it's a, there's a risk in going on a residency because something will happen. But yes, you want to kind of kick us off? I'm sure you're bursting with questions and thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what really comes to mind, you know, when people are talking about the way that they approach or what you produce over the course of the week, it's sort of, I don't know, I think a lot about, you know, the value of a residency, you know, what is the value of a residency? Because sometimes that is the number of words that you produce, and sometimes that is a shift in your thinking, or it can be a shift in the way that you conceive of yourself, or all of these things can be valuable takeaways from a week spent in Bothy. And I think that one thing that does happen when you spend time on your own, you know, in solitude, in a simple space, you know, as well designed as they are, is that you get to know the architecture of your own mind quite well, and that especially at the beginning of a project, it can sort of bring you to confront, you know, your personality or your own habits or the way that you think best, or your you know, your daily routine. You find where it naturally settles by itself. And I've always been sort of quite jealous of people who in a situation like that will live the good life, and it will all be terribly stylish and under control, and they'll make lovely meals for themselves and so on. And I find that almost invariably, left to my own devices, I will live off tin tuna and stay up late and you know, just really sort of regress. And I think that all of that is valuable, you know, like in a sense, daily life does involve a lot of low-level engagement with the outer world, and we have to sort of motivate ourselves to keep up with the routines being imposed upon us. So that can be something that's very good and very relaxing for the brain, I think, to sort of disengage from that. And as projects go on, you know, you get to know them very well, and slowly over time, the more solid they become, the less it feels like you are alone, and the more that you are in the presence of a third party, and that is your project, which slowly becomes more and more corporeal as you go on. I mean, Gaar, was interested in what you had to say about being right at the end of your project. Did you find, I think you've sort of addressed this already, but did you find that you got more of an overview, you know, being sort of off grid?
Yeah, definitely. You know, I'm really grateful that I was able to do these two separate tasks, which felt really bifurcated in some ways, which was I have to finish the darn manuscript. So, you know, that was another 15,000 words or so. And I got that done, and that felt quantifiable. And then I moved into this more nebulous space of, well, I printed out this thing because I hoped I was going to have time to do this kind of fine-tooth, line-by-line, lyrical consideration of how these chapters and thoughts and beliefs flowed together. But I wasn't really sure how that was going to go. I do most of my writing on a computer, and that also tethers me to the internet. And I'm really grateful for that, and I need that. But during this, particularly the second moment, I needed to not have that at all. And so it was really fascinating to realize that I could accomplish the second bit, but I really also recognized that during these final two chapters, I didn't need that access. I had the narrative in my head. I knew the kind of research that had been done already. I just needed to put it on the page. And so this kind of experience really just allowed for that kind of a freedom that the internet can always be there, but also there are these moments when it can be less productive and less helpful.
Sorry. Liz, one thing that I thought was quite interesting in what you had to say was this idea of when you got to the Bothy, there was the style of living was quite a split. I mean, did you think that getting that sort of distance from your subject matter or something like that, was that helpful? You know, looking from a very rural standpoint, did that help you find a new perspective?
Yeah, 100%. I really feel like, I don't know, I felt like I was like living in the thing while I was trying to think about it and do it, and having the opportunity to stand outside of it for a while and look at nothing that I'd ever seen before. And like the view from the Bothy is incredible, but also it's just like kind of a massive horizon, and not having to see anything else, and just like let your thoughts wander. And kind of like, I just felt like things were churning the whole time. Like, as I said, you're going about your day to day and you have a new routine, but every so often you'll be like, oh, like, where's that thought come from about the work? And it kind of leads you off in a little way. And it felt quite meditative, because you're also really reliant on the light and the water. And it felt like you were kind of like going into like a different space where you're less pressured on the internet and less pressured of lots of other things as well.
Sophie, I wonder if that might go for you as well. I mean, writing about Hong Kong from the standpoint of being on egg, do you think that added anything, I don't know, to the way that you were thinking about it?
I think it's been very difficult to try. Like, I've had this idea for a really long time, and I've had the transcripts with my family for about over a year now, and it's just always very difficult to, I feel like I can't ever get enough distance from what's going on out there, and so it was nice to be away from it and then sort of think. It got to a point where I was like, what am I actually adding to the dialogue as just another British Chinese person that wasn't even born in Hong Kong? And then I was thinking, I sort of stepped more into what is the value in this project for me, and what can I bring to the table? And that's why I ended up shifting completely, because being away from family, and then, yeah, I think it just did something to my brain. I also think it was very interesting because I think when we were all there, apart from obviously Eleanor, there was the exhibition at the church about independence. And I thought it was very interesting that it was 97, and that 97 was also like 1997, and that was also when Hong Kong got given back to China. And so I think in terms of time and space, it was just a very interesting experience for me in terms of parallels. And yeah, I don't know, it was giving me this sort of like a little thought of like, oh, what would Hong Kong have been like if in 97 it wasn't given back to a superpower, but was able to be independent on its own. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Anna, it strikes me that your own subject matter, I suppose, is quite outside of these projects, the most sort of enmeshed with the purpose and the function of the Bothy Project itself. You said that you've been working on turning this into a new essay for the collection. What sort of stage are you at, do you think, in terms of the larger project?
In terms of, I've kind of finished that essay. In terms of the larger project, I think actually kind of, yeah, like since Egg, I've kind of got like a kind of much more of a clear idea of what I'm actually trying to do. I think that, and kind of, it makes a lot more sense to me, because I think before I kind of just had this like vague idea of something that I was trying to communicate, and kind of finding it hard to actually know kind of in which direction to take it. But then I think it was just having the space and having the time just to kind of like think it through without any distractions, really helped me to kind of figure out what I was kind of actually writing. And so yeah, it's kind of definitely given me a much clearer sense of, yeah, what I'm actually working on, which is great.
And how do you approach the natural elements of it? Could you talk us through your sort of note-taking process, if you have one? Or?
Yeah, I mean, my writing style, I think, is really quite kind of, I don't know, I definitely struggle, and like have struggled a lot with the kind of the feeling of sitting in front of like a blank sheet, and I find it really hard to write on the computer. And so my writing style, I mostly write everything I do outside. I just have my notebook that I take with me, and or I just write on my phone often. And so I kind of, it's quite scrappy really, the way that I write. But then I think that kind of, I find that helpful to just like free me up to feel that it's kind of like there's no bad ideas, I suppose. I do a lot of free writing as well. And then I just kind of try and then collect that and, you know, kind of piece bits together. It's a bit like a jigsaw puzzle. And so definitely when I was on Egg, I spent quite a lot of time just outside and just kind of walking around with my notebook and just kind of writing bits here and there. And I think that's kind of helpful as from like a nature writing perspective, to just really kind of be able to get a sense of the place, and to yeah, just to kind of like bring like the texture of the place like into the writing as I'm doing it.
Absolutely. Eleanor, thinking in terms of your project, you're starting from quite a different perspective, in that there's this sort of enormous body of transcripts or recordings and so on, and you're whittling down and down and down. I mean, can you talk a little bit about how you go about finding the sections that you will highlight in your book?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I guess the answer would be through lots of different methods. I really enjoy using methods to kind of work or make language work for me, and trying to kind of extrude this meaning, that like whittling down that you were talking about, I think is really accurate. So I start with like a great breadth of material. And one of the processes that I have been using recently is this feminist practice of the echo. So a kind of re-speaking or vocalizing raw material and kind of recording it and transcribing it and then re-speaking it. And this process of re-speaking allows me to try and like really inhabit the material. And then from that, I can kind of pick things out that might sit with something else. And yeah, this process of highlighting as well is really key. This like visual pulling out or visual accenting of certain phrases or words. that I see like kind of match with other things. And so you get this kind of layering or accrual of different voices that are kind of like shaped into, I called them a kind of stand-in or a composite. Yeah, I hope that's answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to remind the audience, we'd love to have some questions in from all of you who are tuning in. So if you have anything to ask either the whole group, or you would like to direct to an individual who's been presenting this evening, that would be wonderful. Just pop it in the chat, or you can pop up your hands. We've got our first question. I'll read aloud Stuart Clements first, and then Anna will come to you in a moment. So to everyone, do you feel that you were personally prepared in advance for the solitude? Maybe Sophie, would you start us off?
Oh, I notoriously don't like being alone. And actually the person that my 11-page sad letter is to actually once said that I really needed to confront why I didn't like being alone. But I think, I don't think I was physically prepared, like I brought all my food and everything, but I don't know. I don't think anything can really prepare you to just sit with your thoughts until you're there doing it. And I do think I've had like a whole personality overhaul after it, because I was like, I don't like a lot of these thoughts. But yeah.
Gaar, I think you had a similar reaction in as much as I know that you also had a break of the internet. Could you tackle that point about solitude?
Yeah, definitely. I knew I would be prepared for the solitude. I grew up in the country, in a very removed area of the States. But since I was 18, I've lived in urban centers. And, a lot of that, I think a lot of my attraction towards an urban environment has to do with my own queerness and feeling at home, more at home in a place surrounded by diversity and large groups of people. But I also have this tension with that where I miss that rural environment. That's something that I don't get enough of. And I had this break when I went to Egg, where I sort of removed myself from social media and Twitter, and then I kept it up when I got back. And it's something I kept up until a few days ago. And I'm really grateful for that time. And I'm also grateful for the perspective of recognition that as toxic and maddening as online environments and those kinds of spaces can be, there is a unique form of storytelling that can come out of them. And so I think overall, I just learned to appreciate a bit of balance to it. Not swing on one side of the pendulum, but kind of being able to sort of embrace both.
Yeah, that seems very reasonable, very well adjusted. Thank you very much. I had an interview with a Thoreau expert, and she had a really interesting perspective about this idea of retreat, and that it's at its most helpful, most functional when it's a sort of a return journey. You go away and you come back, and I think that has a lot to say for it, because you gain so much from the solitude, but then you also gain a lot by returning to your original life. Leslie, I think I'm going to redirect a question. This was sort of part B to that question, which was, does the selection process investigate applicants' feelings and comfort towards solitude in advance? That's not something I know the answer to, because we did our selection blind. So I only saw the written samples. So Leslie, I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, the process of the selection tends to involve a direction to applicants to read the very specific and practical things about the Bothy, which are that, the bed is up high. Both Bothys have a mezzanine, a bed on a mezzanine. One Bothy has a gas stove and the other one doesn't. So in one place you absolutely have to get the stove going to even have a cup of tea. So there are these, you have to walk some distance to the bothies. It's not an impossibly long distance, but it's a very, there's a physicality to kind of life kind of in the bothies, which is not, as I kind of said earlier, they're probably not quite as kind of limited as the mountain bothies, but there is still there is a surprise to the practicality, the labor that you have to kind of invest to just live, no matter how many cans of tuna you take. So there's we absolutely kind of encourage people to recognize that that those are parameters that are part of they're part of our reality, and if it's not for you, then we try and give people encourage them to take the chance to consider it. But then there's always kind of surprises that some people just, it's like water off a duck's back, and it's not even that they've done these kind of things before, it's just that they just dive in and get on with it. And then other people, they find it tougher. And I think the solitude, it's funny you mentioned the word kind of retreat, kind of, Cal, because we tend not to use that word in relation to our residencies, because our residencies are they're constructed under the idea of that they're a place for artists and creative people to work, that there is a kind of even if kind of somebody is not ostensibly making something, they will still be thinking about something, or that the space to consider their practice is also a space of kind of labor. And so you aren't mentioning retreat in relation to like what we do, but some people do think of them as a kind of oh, can I come on retreat? And it's like, well, yeah, like let's just spin that around kind of to be more about somehow an engaged kind of involvement with practice. And so we tend to think about them more in the kind of sense of almost in production, even though there's nothing there's no kind of tools to kind of produce. The tools are space and time and landscape and weather.
An advance, maybe.
And what?
An advance.
Yes. So I don't know. So yeah, and we tend to use, sometimes people, maybe the idea of loneliness kind of is a possibility, as a possible kind of idea that could creep into the residencies. But we do tend to use the word kind of solitary, that there is something particular about with the Bothy Project residencies where you're not on residency with a set of other people and making a kind of network. It's a solitary kind of experience. So we try not to over labor it, but we also try to flag it up. Sometimes it hits, sometimes it doesn't.
That's great. Just while you were speaking there, we had a quick goodbye from Lisette. She had to make her quiet departure as she had warned us. Anna Welch, I think you were next in the queue. If you are happy to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I think someone's already sort of put my question down in the chat, but it was relating to handwriting versus writing on computers. And obviously Anna's already talked about this, but I wondered what the other writers felt about, do you write by hand? Do you write on the computer? And do you find a difference in the kind of writing that's produced or the kind of creative process between the two methods?
Who would be best to speak to that? Eleanor, would that apply to you?
Yeah, definitely. Usually my writing starts by hand and definitely kind of seeps into drawing for me as well, in my practice, and printmaking as well. So I start by making notes kind of obsessively, and I actually read from the notes that I'd written by hand when I was in the archive. And then it goes through this kind of transformation, which does then incorporate kind of typing things up, and that helps to clarify things as well. But as I said before, I come at it from quite a visual direction. So handwriting is really key to that. And also as a way of just thinking through ideas as well. I find that it really helps. Yeah.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. Now I can see you, Jennifer, and I'm going to come to you in just a moment. But Richard Alloway, I think you were next. Would you like to unmute yourself? You've got a question for Anna.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to sort this out. Oh, hang on. There we go. I'm visually here. Yeah, first of all, thanks for everybody speaking. It's been really nice to see this conversation happening around how like landscape and solitude and bothies as well, how they, help with, creating something. And even if the creation is not something visual or writing, we've created a conversation, which I think is fantastic. But my question for you, Anna, is actually, I really love the way you describe things and visualize things. It had these like kind of elements of the romantic sublime coming through, and this need for solitude and silence. And it had these elements of what remind me of Sarah Maitland's The Book of Silence. And you discuss these intimate concerns of like interjecting with humanity. But my question is like, how do you navigate a landscape then that shows elements of humanity? Like, as I saw from your visuals, there's like human presence there, it's not direct, like there's no human, but there's things that are made, there's landscape, there's walkways, bridleways, roads, houses. And is it you saying like, do you recognize that there is like a non-pristine like kind of wilderness, or how do you find the need for the non-human within kind of these residencies? Sorry, that was a few questions thrown in.
No, that's an amazing question. I definitely have always kind of, something I think a lot about is my own kind of personal, almost like yearning that I've had for wilderness and for this kind of pure sense of wilderness. And it's something that, that I've really got from your work, Cal, actually, is being able to like really kind of question that. And I think something I've been thinking about a lot is something that I'm trying to kind of bring into what I'm writing is this idea that kind of we're separate from wilderness is like artificial, and that we are kind of animals ourselves, and the way that kind of our bodies like respond to wilderness and respond to kind of weather, and that's just something that's really kind of fascinating to me. And because I guess if I kind of see humans and kind of any signs of humanity as something other, then I'm kind of othering myself. And what I think I'm really yearning for is a sense of belonging. So it's something that I still feel quite a lot of, I don't know, kind of tension around. I think because like from, what you saw from the reading that I did was kind of that, even going to somewhere that feels very remote and far away can still bring that tension when I kind of come back into contact with people, and how this like pure idea of escaping and of wilderness is something that is kind of not perhaps like a realistic thing to kind of to wish for. And so but it's an amazing question, because it's kind of what I'm trying to figure out really as I'm writing.
Excellent. So it's all I'm going to say. It's bloody difficult, isn't it? Thank you, Anna.
Okay.
That's lovely. Thank you very much, Richard. Jennifer Spector, I think you had some reflections you'd like to offer.
Sure. I just wanted to say thanks to everybody for these wonderful shared experiences and parts of your deep research and writing. It's really, really interesting, all of you, so unique and different. And I've been following the Bothy projects for years now and have long to go. Just haven't really made it because I'm quite far away, but it's wonderful to hear your individual experiences. And there's just so many questions that I could have for each one of you, that what I tried to do was just go through it as quickly as I could. What I saw as a common tie that you were all, I felt, in very different ways embracing, or whether it was intentional or not, you somehow arrived there. And I just wanted to let you know what I saw in that, and then maybe ask you a question at the end, which anyone could answer really. But it was just that I felt like through landscape and through your interior research and everything you brought to your experience notebooks, notes, research, books, and forget the internet, just everything there inside of your heads with you, that each one of you somehow went through this very personal distilling process where you had to sound out things and also become part of the landscape in a different way. But what I find is so interesting is that in Gaar's experience, your experience was kind of, I felt like a quieting down, because you had battled all these years of this kind of these worldviews of, I might quote each one of you, inflammatory views that you were combating and kind of writing through and within yourself even, and that you had this kind of experience of a quieting down to a personal view, a personal brush with more interior voices. And then with Anna, something very similar you mentioned, you talked about unmasking, and you clearly are so tied into a landscape in a different kind of way than say Gaar is. And you really were looking at the poignancy of the pain and unmasking this and really looking at it through landscape, through yourself. So really you were exploring an inner landscape, I felt. And with Lisette and her family histories and writing this poignant, very personal work about her mother, and it felt like it was so labyrinthine. And I love when, I think it was Lisette that said it was a wash of the brain, and that she brought something like that up again later. And that tied in with the view of Egg and the horizon that's so endless. I just could not imagine. I mean, I really could imagine how she was really becoming washed with those tides herself, washed into the landscape, which again reminded me of unmasking and the quieting of Gaar. And then came in Sophie, which was fascinating, Sophie, how you did not even end up writing the book that you intended to write. I'm so fascinated by this trajectory that you went through. That itself is the topic of a book, because you were like distillation on high, because you had a whole book in mind based on something very researched. And I love that you were able to find in the landscape this incredible release of not holding on. Just the very act, again, of being washed into the landscape, as Lisette had said, an unmasking, a quieting down, a retuning into your own voices, which were your familial voices, which were the truths and the honest, bare, as Cal mentions, architecture of your own mind, which is a beautiful quote to Cal. And then, so that was really interesting. And then Eleanor, which, I mean, it just, so many things came to mind. I mean, books I've read, histories, reminded me of when I did my master's work on dissolution in the novels of Jane Bowles and Juna Barnes. And I thought about the letters of Georgia O'Keeffe that her assistant wrote. I don't know if you read that book, but the diaries of the woman that worked for years and years for Georgia O'Keeffe. And this is such an interesting topic, but you talked about plurality of figures and composite characters and extruding meaning from these voices. And again, you specifically mentioned making visible things private, again, tying back to unmasking and the wisdom that you come to in a voice that's been quieted down, distilled, hushed down through landscapes. And I guess what my question would be quickly is, in your experiences through landscape, did you find that there was a rehabilitation of self? Did you re-inhabit your own landscapes? And if so, how? And when you returned back to the worlds that you came from, were you able to keep splinters of those severed selves And thank you so much to everyone and to the organizers, Leslie, Cal, and everyone at Bothy Projects for this really interesting talk.
Thanks very much, Jennifer. Anyone among you want to grab that question? Any volunteers? Otherwise, I'm going to assign it. Sophie.
I can, yeah. So I think there was something I said to someone recently about how in the busyness of modern life, I'd lost sight of the person I was, the person I wanted to be, and the person I was becoming. And I felt that the latter two were just poles apart. And I think I'd gotten so stuck into like the hyper-consumerism, hyper-production, hyper-capitalist sort of cycle. And I recently reread the intro to the Communist Manifesto, the one written by, I want to say Jodie Dean, where it talks about like communicative capitalism. And I think for me, I'm still in the stage that Gaar's now come back into the internet, but I'm still without internet. And I think quieting down all of that is the way that I've sort of begun to re-inhabit myself and re-inhabit, I guess, like the adult, quote unquote, adult me that I always wanted to be as a kid. Just in terms of, you know, being more patient, being more kind, being more open and honest and all of those things. And I think I'd sort of slightly lost sight of that. And then when it is just you in a body, you sort of realize the things that you can change to feel more comfortable in yourself, or at least that's how I felt. But limiting my internet presence, I think, was one of the main ways that I kept that going. So yeah.
Yeah, Gaar, would you have any thoughts to add on that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I spoke a little bit about how I was very grateful for that period of time that I had, really for 5 months when I came back, where I removed myself from a lot of that kind of feeling like I needed to be connected to that sort of constant online discourse. And I'm grateful for that. And yet, I think the other thing that I really, you spoke of fractured landscapes. One of the things that I really held on to, I think, and it took some time for this perspective, I think it's something that's really come into clarity now, is that a lot of what I'm writing through is about this linkage between queerness and migration. And part of this means that I have moved to spaces, and I've been in this sort of constant flux of movement since I've been 18. And even before that, there was a restlessness. And some of that has been privileged economic migration, some of it has been queer considerations, but there's been a sense of movement, and there's been a very practical physical movement. And I think I really romanticized what egg was for me, and it was so helpful and provided a lot of clarity. But this notion that I could sort of come back and continue to completely remove myself didn't feel especially practical. And so part of that consideration of coming to that was, well, I had this wonderful experience, and there's maybe a way that I could continue to plug into that solitude, but not feel like it has to continue to be all encompassing. And that's also a question of migration, and a question of choosing to be in places, and when you're able to kind of switch into that mode. So, Sophie, maybe you continue this, and maybe I do to some degree. And I've been really grateful, but also for me, there might be modes where I do that a little more frequently than I do now. Yeah. Thank you for the question.
Leslie, I think I'm going to hand back to you, if that's okay.
No, because I suppose I'm kind of wondering, not from any kind of evaluative interest, but absolute just my human curiosity is this kind of opportunity was for people on the kind of the cusp of kind of getting to the kind of the next point. Gaar, I'll come back to you, because I think you were kind of maybe closest to kind of like a kind of completion of kind of what you were kind of working on. But does anybody else want to kind of like give a sense of where people could kind of connect with your writing kind of in the next year? Sophie, are you kind of Because also
Oh,
maybe
no.
like, maybe even kind of like self-publishing, or there's kind of the sort of the conventional routes of publishing are not necessarily where everything kind of has to kind of arrive at, but yeah, like I feel like people might be interested to kind of follow your writing.
I feel like for me personally, for this project, I need to get to the end of the manuscript first. But yeah, I guess for my other writing, I used to say I'm present on Instagram. That's a bit iffy now. I've recently unfollowed everyone except Bothy Project. I'm like currently in the process of sort of seeing what is helpful noise and what is just noise. But I have a website that I don't know if I will continue updating. I think I'm going to end up being what I was really looking into this, of how practical it is to be a digital freelancer that's not online. And I was sort of thinking I can be one of those people that like appears and does things, but the rest of the time is just a mystery. But at some point you might see my name on a book. That,
Okay, well,
maybe,
as long as you tell us, give us a hint when that's kind of imminent.
Yeah, I'll email you, and then you can maybe like put it in the newsletter or something.
Anna, are you feeling like you might kind of share some of your writing soon?
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping to. I think that I'm naturally quite private, and I'm definitely trying to kind of change that a little bit when it comes to my writing, because I do find it quite difficult to feel like something is shareable. So my hope is to start to kind of just put myself out there a bit more. But at the moment, I don't really have much of an online presence at all. I do have an Instagram account, but I don't think I've posted anything in over a year. But that is probably the only place I really am online. But yeah, if I don't know, if anything happened, then I would let you know, and then you could share for me.
I think kind of because my background's kind of art, I'm kind of used to small run dedicated publishing that possibly doesn't even have an ISBN number. So there's always space kind of in art publishing for writing to get kind of out there. Eleanor, you kind of come from you have a kind of sense of kind of how that works, but you're maybe thinking in a different way about how to share what you're working on.
Yeah, definitely. You could probably all tell I'm not an actor reading that. And I'd really like to find some performers to actually speak this, because it's a dialogue, I said, between like multiple figures and multiple players. And I've done it once before, just with a group of friends who very bravely put themselves forward just to read it out together. And it completely changes it. I mean, it exists in one way when you read it and you kind of hear your internal voice reading these different characters, but then when they're given voice by actual people, it's a very different thing. So I would love to apply for funding and try and get some performers together and have it exist as a performance. But yeah, we'll see.
And Gaar, when's the publication date?
Yeah, the publication date is early 2024. So more exciting announcements in 2023. I'm really thrilled with my publishing team. My editors are just fantastic. And I'm at this I feel like I'm also at a bit of a precipice where, I've just finished my doctorate. I have just finished, this manuscript, edits still to come, of course. And so it leaves this sort of wide open space I haven't had for 4 years. Before that, I was freelance writing, and the question now is, do I sort of completely lean into a second book, which I'm very excited about, and I've begun to do. And I actually was there was a very ambitious part of me that brought two of my books, my precious books that I brought to Egg, were related to my next manuscript, because I was like, well, maybe I'll have a little bit of time to work on this. And of course I had no time at all. But I'm really excited about that. or the question is, do I go back to freelancing to some degree? Do I try to balance those things? Also what's economically realistic, all of that. But it's an exciting time. It's a really exciting time. So thank you.
Well, I think that's a kind of great kind of way to kind of conclude this event. It's been really, I have to say, because our residencies are solo and they're kind of end to end, we don't always, Bothy Project as a kind of entity doesn't, we have kind of intermittent connection with people, and it doesn't always kind of involve kind of big kind of conversations. And so this is a genuine kind of treat, and something that we are going to kind of continue with kind of the sort of the logics of our kind of like of our residencies, and by bringing kind of the visual artists who are kind of who were kind of between Inshriach and Sweeney's will be coming together. I think it's the 8th of February, and I think that will be a kind of a different kind of conversation kind of again, and a different way to kind of engage with practice. And then we'll kind of continue with these kind of discussions, which kind of really kind of dig into kind of people's kind of practice as a way to kind of understand how the residencies are so diverse and kind of and essential and kind of and I don't know, surprising. Sophie, I didn't really kind of twig that you'd kind of cut so many ties because of us.
When you called me when I was out there, though, I was like, this is life-changing, and you were like, oh, okay.
It's true. I just thought, maybe it was the weather or something, but it's kind of something that it's kind of yeah, I think we all need to kind of keep a balance kind of somewhere. So I will sign off now and say thank you to the residents, including Liz, who left, and kind of Natasha, who wasn't able to join us, to Cal, who even took over the questions, which was more than I was anticipating, to Evie, who kind of did the kind of like the technical kind of setup and kept us all calm, and to all the kind of audience members, thank you for joining in. And finally, I guess Creative Scotland, who kind of supported this thread of residencies and a number of other ones. So thank you so much, and it's very nice to see you all. Thank you very much.